Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Law, and together with Mr. Jordan White, I will be presenting arguments on behalf of the player in this matter of salary arbitration for Alexander Georgiev. I will start by briefly summarizing the player's filing number, and then Mr. White will summarize our analysis from our written submission. I will then explain our methodology and analysis for selecting comparable players. Mr. Georgiev asked this panel to award him a salary of at least $1 more than the midpoint of $2,520,000. Mr. Georgiev submits the salary of $2,900,000 as fair and appropriate given his play and the marketplace for comparable players. I will now turn the floor over to Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Law. I'll now proceed with a brief overview of Mr. Georgiev's career leading to arbitration. Now, Mr. Georgiev is an undrafted goaltender from Rus, Bulgaria. In fact, Mr. Georgiev is the first Bulgarian national to play in the NHL. Prior to breaking into the NHL, Mr. Georgiev had played for TPS of the SM Liga in Finland, finishing first and sixth amongst goaltenders in that league in the 2016-17 season in goals against average and save percentage, respectively. Now, Mr. Georgiev signed a 3-year entry-level contract with the Rangers on July 17, 2017. Mr. Georgiev would then split time between the Rangers and the Hartford Wolfpack of the American Hockey League in the 2017-18 season. In his 10 appearances that he made for the Rangers that year, Mr. Georgiev performed very well, posting a .918 save percentage, a .315 goals against average, and a 2.1 goals saved above average. Making Mr. Georgiev's performance all the more impressive was that he faced a relatively heavy workload that was 38.57 shots against per 60 minutes. In the 2018-19 season, Mr. Georgiev again split time between the Rangers and the Wolfpack. This season, Mr. Georgiev once again performed well, posting a .914 save percentage, a .291 goals against average, and a 4.3 goals saved above average. Mr. Georgiev's number of NHL appearances jumped to 33 that season, indicating the faith that the Rangers had in him. The 2019-20 season was Mr. Georgiev's first as an NHL regular, as he appeared in almost half of the Rangers games that season. Mr. Georgiev once again recorded solid totals for save percentage and goals against average, while being tasked with a heavy workload on a Rangers team that was relatively weak defensively in front of him. Now, despite playing under half of the Rangers games in the 2019-20 NHL season, Mr. Georgiev was in the top third of NHL goaltenders for total shots faced or shots against per 60 that season. In the COVID-shortened 2021 season, Mr. Georgiev continued to be a reliable source of net mining for the Rangers. On October 15th, 2020, Mr. Georgiev was rewarded for his reliability, signing a 2-year contract extension carrying an annual average value of $2.425 million. Now, Mr. Georgiev's performance dipped slightly from his career averages in the 21-22 NHL regular season. However, Mr. Georgiev still posted respectable totals for save percentage and goals against average, despite missing games to COVID-19 protocol during the season. And during the Rangers' run to the Eastern Conference Finals this past playoffs, Mr. Georgiev played spectacularly when called upon, recording a save percentage of .935 and a goals against average of .204. Now, Mr. Georgiev is what we would describe as a 1B backup goaltender, meaning that he's not called upon to play a starting role, but he can provide quality goaltending and shoulder a heavier load than most traditional backups. The best 1B backup goaltenders are able to maintain a consistent level of play, despite sometimes, like Mr. Georgiev has, going long periods without starting games, and they're still able to give their team a chance to win on any given night, regardless of the frequency of their starts. Now, Mr. Georgiev has a wealth of NHL experience and has proven to be a very durable goaltender over the course of his career, having missed just only 3 games due to injury over his 5 seasons in the league. Mr. Georgiev has proven himself to be a capable NHL goaltender, despite being called upon to carry a heavy burden with a defensively porous Rangers team in front of him. Mr. Georgiev's aforementioned durability is a testament to his reliability and his ability to play a significant role as a 1B backup. I'll now pass the floor back to Mr. Law, who will introduce our methodology and our analysis for comparable players.
Thank you, Mr. White. I will now turn to the comparable players from Mr. Georgiev. In the closed universe of this arbitration competition, 7 goaltenders were provided as potential comparable players to Mr. Georgiev: Tristan Jarry, Aiden Hill, Elvis Merlikins, Alex Nedeljkovic, Ilya Samsonov, and Jonas Korpisalo. We will now explain the methodology that we use to select comparable players to Mr. Georgiev. We use 3 criteria to narrow down the list of players to those most comparable to Mr. Georgiev. Firstly, the player must have appeared in at least 25 games over 2 seasons. Secondly, the player must have a career goals against average of less than 3.00. Thirdly, the player must have a career save percentage above 0.905. These criteria were chosen because, in order to accurately ascertain Mr. Georgiev's value, the comparable players should have a similar amount of NHL experience and similar career totals to Mr. Georgiev. After applying the above methodology to the closed universe of comparable players, we were left with 2 goaltenders, Tristan Jarry and Jonas Korpisalo. Turning to Tristan Jarry, Mr. Jarry signed a 3-year contract carrying an average annual value of $3,500,000 with the Pittsburgh Penguins on October 15th, 2020. Although Mr. Jarry's performance over his career and in his platform season have been marginally superior to that of Mr. Georgiev, there are some factors that must be taken into account when comparing the 2 goaltenders. Firstly, Mr. Georgiev has played over twice as many NHL games as Mr. Jarry has, thus giving us a greater sample size of Mr. Georgiev's performance and providing strong evidence that Mr. Georgiev's current level of play is sustainable. Secondly, throughout their careers, Mr. Jarry has had far stronger teams in front of him than Mr. Georgiev has. In every season of Mr. Jarry's career, the Penguins have made the playoffs, even capturing the Stanley Cup at the conclusion of the 2016-17 NHL season. The Rangers have only made the playoffs once in Mr. Georgiev's 5-year career. From Mr. Jarry's 2016-17 rookie season to his 2019-20 platform season, the Penguins allowed the 15th most shots against the NHL. From Mr. Georgiev's 2017-18 rookie season to his 2021-22 platform season, the Rangers allowed the 3rd most shots against the NHL. Among the 66 NHL goaltenders who played at least 10 games in Mr. Jarry's 2019-20 platform season, Mr. Jarry faced the 41st most shots against per 60, while Mr. Jarry was 3rd in the league in that category. Sorry, Mr. Georgiev was 3rd in the league in that category. In conclusion, although Mr. Jarry has performed marginally better than Mr. Georgiev, Mr. Georgiev's larger sample size of NHL games and the weak teams that have played in front of him must be considered. Therefore, Mr. Georgiev should be awarded a salary of slightly less than that of Mr. Jarry. Given the factors outlined above, an award of $2,900,000 is fair and reasonable for the player. Turning now to our second comparable, on April 17th, 2020, Jonas Korpisalo signed a 2-year contract carrying an average annual value of $2,800,000 with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Across their careers, Mr. Georgiev and Mr. Korpisalo have recorded nearly identical statistics. Mr. Georgiev has played in 129 games to Mr. Korpisalo's 127. Mr. Georgiev has started in 117 games to Mr. Korpisalo's 116, and both goaltenders have the exact same career save percentage of .908. Making his performance even more impressive is the fact that Mr. Georgiev faced 5.5% more shots against per 60 and had 4.38 times more goals saved above average than Mr. Korpisalo has across his career. While on the face of the 2 players' respective platform season statistics, it would appear that Mr. Korpisalo slightly outperformed Mr. Georgiev. 2 very important factors must be considered when contrasting the value of the 2 players. Firstly, Mr. Korpisalo played on the Columbus Blue Jackets. They were one of the best defensive teams in the NHL. Of the 67 goaltenders who played in at least 10 games in Mr. Korpisalo's platform year, Mr. Korpisalo faced the 8th lowest shots against per 60 minutes. Secondly, in his platform season, Mr. Korpisalo missed 24 of the Blue Jackets' final regular season games after suffering a torn meniscus. Given the importance of agility and quick side-to-side lateral movements that for an NHL goaltender, a serious knee injury such as a torn meniscus is a very worrying injury for a goaltender to sustain, and such an injury gives a team more than enough reason to worry about the substantial risk of re-injury and declining future performance. Given the nearly identical careers that Mr. Korpisalo and Mr. Georgiev have had, the worrying meniscus tear that Mr. Korpisalo suffered in his platform season, and the stark difference in the quality of teams in front of the two netminders, the player submits that a salary award of $2,900,000 is reasonable for Mr. Georgiev. In our conclusion, the player submits that when determining Mr. Georgiev's value, his considerable experience, durability, proven ability to provide quality goaltending in a relief 1B role, and the poor quality of teams playing in front of him should be given considerable weight. Given these factors, the player submits that Mr. Georgiev should be awarded a salary of at least $1 more than the midpoint of $2,520,000, and that a salary award of $2,900,000 is fair and appropriate. If there are no questions, that concludes Mr. Georgiev's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, if the other team for the club side could please share their screen. And your 15 minutes will begin now.
Okay, great. Bailiff, judges, thank you very much. Mike will be, my co-counsel, Mike Baubon, will be doing our little introduction here, and then we will get on to our further presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. I just want to say once again, thank you to all the judges for allowing us to present our case here today on behalf of the New York Rangers. The midpoint salary, we don't believe Alexander Grigoriev's salary should be below the midpoint salary of $2.52 million, and we are team 14. So a couple of things we want to talk about in this presentation here today. Gore's consistent decline in his save percentage overall. As we get further into his overall career statistics, we've seen a decline in his overall saves each and every season, which shows the performance of his lack of performance, which should be awarded a lower salary when compared to further goaltenders we'll highlight later in this presentation here today. And lastly, for the foregoing reasons, that's why we believe a figure below the midpoint is any figure above the midpoint, is inappropriate. Just a quick overview of Gorev's career highlights, overview of his career so far. He was an undrafted player in the 2017 NHL draft. Gorev has been relatively healthy and reliable for the Rangers, but as much as we do appreciate it, we do have to acknowledge the regression of his play on the ice. And furthermore, we appreciate there's been no off the ice incidents as well during his 5 seasons with the Rangers. And as we mentioned previously, Gorev statistically has performed worse each and every season. As you can see, here is his jumping into his career statistics. I just want to highlight that the 2020-2021 season was the COVID season. So we do acknowledge that some of the stats may not be full compared to a regular season, but they are aligned if it were to be a full played out season. As you can see, 2017 was his best overall, 2017-2018 season was his best overall season, but each season, Gorev's career statistics have regressed, especially in the save percentage. It's gone down by 0.05 in each season. Jumping into his platform season, which is the highlighted category, in most recent season as well, Gorev's ranked 73rd in save percentage during his platform year, which is his worst save seasonal in his career. Further illustrates the negative trend in his career. Further, if you look across the board in a lot of the other categories, a lot of his seeing a career worse in almost in every category as well.
So the first comparable player that we're going to be looking at when determining Georgiev's figure for the midpoint salary below $2.52 million is Adin Hill. His platform season was, again, during the COVID shortened season of 2020 to 2021. His award after that was $2.175 million annually. A little bit of overview on Adin Hill's career up until this point. He was a 3rd-round draft pick in the 2015 NHL draft, mainly backup goaltender throughout his career up until this point. And again, we highlight the $2.175 million figure after his platform season. So as you can see here, here's a statistical comparison of Georgiev versus Hill up until this point in their careers. They have identical save percentages. Georgiev has played in significantly amount more games than Hill has played, despite the same amount of seasons played for both players, which has been 5. Shots against have significantly favored Georgiev as well. Nearly
Mr. Georgiev would like to object to the inclusion of 2021-22 as it is after Mr. Hill's platform year. It should not be included when determining his value or the value of Mr. Georgiev.
That's fine. We're going to touch on that in our next slide. Yep, thanks, Al. So further building on opposing counsel's point, we were going to move forward, if Zoom will cooperate. Again, focusing on these key stats, but what we want to focus on though with Hill were his stats up until the point of his contract award. So we want to compare Hill before he was awarded his $2.175 million figure versus Georgiev up until this point before an award decision is ultimately awarded to him. So up until that point for Hill, he had played in 49 games, had faced 1,324 shots, a goal against average of 2.90. And for our purposes, the most important statistic our presentation is focusing on is that save percentage of 0.906. And again, focusing on the key statistics that we want to focus on with Georgiev's declining performance. This is a comparison of their career stats up until the point of Georgiev as of now versus Hill post that, before that award, excuse me. So again, as you can see, the games played significantly favor Georgiev. The games started favor him. He's allowed slightly higher figure of goals against with 0.04, a little bit, slight nudge more goals allowed for Georgiev. And again, the save percentage is also a little bit significantly higher than Hill, as you guys can see in that statistical comparison. Again, this is another thing that we wanted to focus on was the platform year comparison between Georgiev and Hill. Georgiev this past season had statistically, based on his save percentage, his worst career season. It was under 900. It was 73rd of all eligible goaltenders in the NHL at 0.898. Again, we want to note that Hill did have the COVID shortened season, so take that sample as you will. Regular 56 games in that season, and as a backup goaltender, it doesn't quite amount to the same sample size as Georgiev. But when looking at that save percentage, considering it's 0.15 higher than Georgiev's, we do think it's significant to consider that, as well as the goals against average. And considering the platform year, as well as those previous slide statistics of Hill up until that point, Hill was awarded $2.175 million for that. So the point we're trying to make is that Georgiev, when facing that season, determining what his salary is going to be, produced his worst statistical outlying season. And again, this slide just kind of summarizes our points that we've made with Adin Hill. Similar backup roles to them. Georgiev has played in more games. He's started more games. But however, Hill outperformed Georgiev in their respective platform seasons. And we believe that because of that, and because of the consistent decline in save percentage from Georgiev, we do think that a figure beyond the 2.52 million figure, while going past that may be inappropriate for the Rangers side, we recognize that his availability, his durability are important traits for 1B backup goaltender. However, considering that the Rangers need to consider beyond just a 1B goaltender and need to fill out the roster with other players to improve the roster, we believe better value can be given if an award is given below the midpoint figure.
So moving on into our second comparable player, Ilya Samsonov. His platform season was the 2020-2021 season, in which after following that season, he was awarded $2 million.
There we go.
Just a quick overview of Samsonov's career. He was the 22nd overall pick in the first round of the 2015 NHL draft. He had a very great start to his rookie campaign, yet during the COVID season, he struggled. And following that season, he was awarded the $2 million, which was his platform season. The comparison of Georgiev and Samson's statistical breakdown. As you see, they are very similar players. We do acknowledge that Gorev has a larger sample size, but with some of Samson's inexperience, we still believe that they're very comparable players, as Gorev may have played in more games and might have a little bit better over at the moment career save percentage, but the sample size shows that Gorev has given opportunities to play in bigger throughout more opportunities given to play throughout his career so far, which believes, and as you can still see, the regression is at a much rapid rate between the two players.
Again, Mr. Georgiev objects to the use of faulty career statistics and the addition of an extra year on that slide. I understand you guys are explaining this later, but we're very concerned that that might prejudice the arbitrator in this matter. It's not fair. Those numbers should be inadmissible.
That's fair. And again, our point is going to be made after this slide. And like you acknowledge, we are going to be mainly focusing on the comparison of Samsonov up until that point when his award was given.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Pat said, we just wanted to highlight these stats. We do not consider after the award, such as these statistics were consideration when awarding Simpson during his platform season. His platform season was the 2020-21 season, and we do acknowledge that that season was also cut short because of the pandemic. And the key statistical error comparison, Gorev versus Samson in the pre-award. As you can see, Gorev has played, we do acknowledge he's played more games, but Samson has a lower goals, GA goals against average as well. And Gorev, as we mentioned, has the larger sample size.
And identical save percentages as of note is important too there to recognize.
Thank you, Pat. And then during the platform year, the comparison of Gorev versus Samson, Gorev has played in 28 games with the goals against average of 2.29 and save percentage of 898. Samsonov played in 18 games that year with the goals against average 269 with 902 save percentage. Even though Samsonov went into COVID protocols twice during that year, he did struggle, but he still outperformed Gorev during that season. Which is decision to award Samsonov based off of $2 million based off a stellar rookie campaign. And even though his second year was more challenging, but his pedigree will show that why he was deserved of that award. And as we've mentioned throughout the previous slides, this slide just kind of gives a quick overall summary of between the two players. There has been a smaller sample size for Samson's career versus Gorev. The platform year performance were similar despite Samson's COVID setbacks. $2 million award was based off some of the stats and as well as pedigree that to show that Samson still has potential in the league, while Gorev is still on a rapid decline and regressing. And any salary above the midpoint will show that it would be inappropriate for that.
So to kind of bring this home, we believe that the evidence we presented shows that Georgiev is not deserving of a salary that is beyond the midpoint of $2.52 million. Again, we've showcased precedent from stats taken before an award was given for our precedent players that show that those players were either similar or slightly above or slightly below. The point is that very similar statistically players. Again, looking at that precedent, Hill was awarded 2.175. Samsonov, given his pedigree, was only given $2 million. The declining every single season in save percentage is also very noteworthy for us. From a club perspective, had it remained consistent or dipped and dived a little bit, it would have been a little more understandable. But given that it's been 5 straight seasons of declining save percentage by about about 0.05 each season, we do believe that is of note, and we have to acknowledge that as we determine an award that is appropriate for Mr. Georgiev. And again, the club does appreciate his availability, his health, his no off the ice issues. That stuff is all very important, not just for a backup 1B goaltender, but as for New York Ranger itself. So that is very important for us. But we do note that given the declining save percentage and the statistics in that regard, as well as the precedent, we do believe that a midpoint beyond 2.52 million would be inappropriate for Mr. Georgiev. And that wraps up our presentation. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, judges.
Judges, excuse me.
The 2-minute recess will start now.
Team 14, if you could stop the screen share, that'd be great.
Players rebuttal, you have 7.5 minutes.
Are we just starting like that?
Yeah, you have 7.5 minutes starting whenever you have your presentation up.
Okay, sure. Just give me one moment.
Sure.
Now, given the tight turnaround here, we have not had time to prepare rebuttal slides. If the Rangers, if you have, all the power to you. Congratulations.
We have not.
No, okay. Well, I'll
Do
do
it
my
old
best.
school.
I'll do my best to speak slowly here so that the statistics that I say can be noted by the arbitrators. We'd like to just start by talking about some of the statistics that our friends have used in their presentation. The main one is save percentage. And we agree, save percentage does tell us a lot about a goaltender. It tells us exactly how many of the shots they faced they have stopped. What it doesn't tell you is the degree of difficulty with which those shots came. Some shots, not all shots are created equally. Some are incredibly difficult shots to stop, backdoor chances, slot chances, odd man rush chances, and some are very easy. And neither team here has told you why, we should account for degree of difficulty, but it is important to consider that over the course of his career, Mr. Georgiev has faced as on a team that has given up the third most shots out of any team in the league. Now, I can't tell you what the degree of difficulty is there, but he is facing and his team is giving up more shots than almost every other team in the league, bar two. So with that note, one thing that can be quantified for is trust in a goaltender. We can quantify that in terms of their experience. Now, games played in the NHL aren't just awarded equitably amongst all of the goaltenders who play. Games played and games started are earned in the National Hockey League and in professional hockey. And Mr. Georgiev, as we will get into as our rebuttal goes on, has compiled significantly more games played and games started than both Mr. Samsonov and Mr. Hill. Now, I'm going to move on to some rebuttal arguments specific to Mr. Hill, and these themes are common throughout our rebuttal. First of all, Mr. Hill has never started more than 17 games in a season. Now, that's in line with a usual backup goaltender. Mr. Georgiev, on the other hand, has throughout his career started in the 30s, in the high 20s, and that's definitely more indicative of a goaltender who is a 1B, especially in some seasons, he's approached 50% of his team's games played in terms of where he started. And yes, Mr. Hill has certainly performed well over his career. His save percentage is very good, but it's in a very small sample size. Again, that should be taken into consideration when assessing his career performance. And as we've mentioned, Mr. Georgiev is a player who can start a plethora of games for your team. And that's more in line with what we are describing, a 1B backup goaltender who can shoulder the load for you and can play on good teams and give you a chance to win. It's also worth noting that Mr. Georgiev has gotten shutouts more consistently than Mr. Hill. He's averaging about 2 a season over his entire career. And in fewer starts, Mr. Hill has consistently posted losing records. His career win percentage is about 40%, which is in the same span, the Arizona Coyotes, the team that he played for up until he signed his most recent contract, won about 43% of their games, meaning they're winning more often without Mr. Hill in the net. Mr. Georgiev's winning percentages by themselves are about 55.6% in his platform season and 49.6% across his career. I apologize, we did run out of time when we were looking at these. I can't tell you exactly where he figures in relative to the Rangers. And with that, I will pass along the floor to Mr. Law, who will conclude our rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. White. Similar to the issues posed by the selection of Adin Hill as a comparable player, Mr. Samsonov does not have the same experience in the league that Mr. Georgiev has. Mr. Samsonov has only played parts of 2 seasons in the NHL, and due to his lack of his games played, he was not included in Mr. Georgiev's robust selection criteria. Mr. Samsonov has only played 45 games in his NHL career, a huge gap in experience between him and Mr. Georgiev. Mr. Georgiev has played almost triple the amount of games as Mr. Samsonov in the league, showing the trust that the Rangers have in him to play that number of games behind Henrik Lundqvist in his first 3 years and the reigning Vezina winner in the most recent one. Between his 2 seasons, Mr. Samsonov's save percentage fell from .913 to .902. Moreover, his goals against average rose from 2.55 to 2.69. Mr. Georgiev has also provided quality starts on a more consistent basis. Quality starts are defined as a start where a goaltender has a save percentage exceeding the league average, or when he faces fewer than 20 shots and has a save percentage above 80.885. Mr. Georgiev's last 2 seasons saw him produce a quality start percentage of 50% and then 46% in his platform year. Mr. Samsonov's quality start percentage fell from 54% in the year prior to his platform year to 38.9% in his platform year of 2020-2021, a fall of over 7%. To summarize, the team has forwarded 2 comparable players who bear little resemblance to Mr. Georgiev. Neither player has played enough games to be meaningfully compared to Mr. Georgiev's lengthy career and sufficient sample size, nor to determine Mr. Georgiev's proper value. Based on Mr. Georgiev's career, his ability to amass and continuously play a significant number of games played, his superiority to Mr. Korpisalo, and his similarity to Mr. Jari, Mr. Georgiev submits that he should be awarded a salary of at least $1 greater than the midpoint of $2.52 million. Mr. Georgiev submits that a salary award of $2.9 million is fair and appropriate for his services. If there are no questions, this concludes Mr. Georgiev's submissions.
The other team, the other side, your rebuttal, you have 7.5 minutes, begins now.
Great. So for our rebuttal, we're just going to do a few overall themes, as well as I will be breaking down into the first comparable player, and then my co-counsel, Mike Balaban, will be hitting the second comparable player. So a few overall themes that we wanted to touch on. We do appreciate Georgiev's availability and consistency. The player side counsel represents these very well, and they are definitely appreciated by the Rangers side. However, the Rangers do feel that in order to take that next step, we do believe we need a more consistent goaltender in that 1B spot. Again, as we highlighted, and as opposing counsel did mention, not all shots are created equal. We don't have that data in front of us, unfortunately, but when it is consistent every season, you see every season it's going down, it's going down, it's going down. There's no valleys or anything. It's just consistent. That is something that the Rangers have to consider when evaluating whether to give that award beyond the midpoint salary. Again, also Georgiev's best season, it was only in 10 games played where he had a .918 save percentage. Again, that's been the main focus of our presentation, is that save percentage, and not all shots are created equal. But given the sample size of just 10 games of that, that is something of note for us. So those are kind of some overall themes of our rebuttal here as well. Getting into the first comparable player of Jerry there. His platform season for Jerry was based on save percentage critically higher than Grigoriev's. Grigoriev had a .898 save percentage after that, as opposed to Jerry's .911. Jerry was awarded $3.5 million for that. And again, we see that, and we actually had a question too for opposing counsel. I don't know if you guys have this information, that's okay. Would you guys happen to have Jerry's pedigree, like his draft position or like any other relevant statistics like that, just to base on like, Grigoriev was an undrafted free agent out of Europe, potentially limiting his potential to that. If you guys don't have that, that's okay, but we just respectfully ask if you have it.
Not in front of me.
Second round.
Me and Mr. Law, honestly, it doesn't really bear any semblance on this arbitration. We're talking about what he's done as an NHL player. We don't care where he was drafted. Respectfully.
That's fine. Yeah, we were just asking politely. Again, we just want to make sure to have, if we don't have that information, that's fine. But we do think that is something to evaluate, because we are paying right now for what we view as potential performance, and to have that, we need to consider all the factors, past performance as well as pedigree, something that we do think we should consider. Yep. So those are kind of the main points that I have for Jerry. Unless my co-counsel Mike has anything he wants to add for that.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the Jonas Koparos comparable player as well. I just wanted to highlight mostly the save percentage during the time at the award. Koparos' save percentage was, I believe, .911, while Goriev's save percentage at the time of his award was .98, or .898, which is still a significant decrease between the two players during the time of the awards for each player. And then I also want to reiterate what my co-counsel has said during this, the rebuttal, the fact that Goriev has significantly decreased overall in his statistics throughout each and every season, notably in the save percentage card. We, as opposing counsel mentioned earlier, with the not all shots created equally, but still has a significant factor when you have to evaluate the overall save percentage. And with that, we do want to also acknowledge the availability and durability of Goriev, but still we like to acknowledge the sample size between Korpisals and Goriev is a little bit the same, but Korpisals does have a bigger sample size, and we do acknowledge that he's also faced some injuries concern as well. But I think the age of Goriev also has to play a factor, as he's only, I believe, 25 or 26 years old, and he's already starting to have a regression as a player, and his production looks like it's going to continue to decrease further into his career. If my co-counsel has anything to add.
Yep. No, I think that's pretty much our main points that we had. Again, thank you, judges. Thank you, bailiff. Thank you, opposing counsel.
Yeah.